Right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Talking Radio. It's first ever webinar hosted by myself, Dylan Kemlo. I just want to make sure that everybody is able to hear before I continue. So on the right-hand side of your webinar page, you'll see a section where you can type and where we can interact throughout the webinar. So if you can hear me, please just type yes on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, thank you, Lawrence, Patrick, Susan, Henk, Guy. Okay, so a few of you coming in to the room, which is fantastic. And for the next section, if you could please tell me if you're able to see the page that you're looking at on the webinar. It should say, well, it does say Johannesburg Specials Webinar, and at the bottom hosted by Dylan Kemler. Please say yes. Okay, thanks very much. A couple of yeses coming through from you. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining this event. So quite exciting for us. I've taken a lot of time to get around to putting this product together and to interact with our clients and people who are interested in this particular event. So I'll just explain quickly what we're going to do this afternoon so that you know exactly where we're going. Right now, it's just a little introduction about myself and what this webinar is going to be about. We have taken the liberty of doing a recording in anticipation of presenting this webinar, which is obviously going to be one in a series of webinars which we hope to bring out, or not hope, we are going to plan to bring out for everybody with specific reference to uncontrolled airspace, in this instance, special rules area. And what we're doing, we're focusing today on the Johannesburg special rules area because, you know, that is something that's an airspace which is quite complex. And from the start, I'll say that, you know, my confession to this is I've been presenting radio lectures for the past 25 years now. I've worked in this Johannesburg airspace as an air traffic controller. I've also flown in this airspace as a student pilot, but I still don't confess to know everything about this airspace. So I'm going to give you as much information as I can. If you find through this webinar that there's anything from your side that you think you'd like to add to, you want to make some suggestions and comments, please feel free to either give us a message on the right-hand side in the chat box, or you can of course email me. Further information, we've got a couple of polls that will be showing as we go along. They will also appear on the right hand side of this webinar. So while you're watching, please interact with it as well. It's just 3 polls which we're running just to get some feedback from yourselves. The webinar itself, I've made it as simple as possible. Sometimes I do get stray a bit because I enjoy the subject, so you'll hear that in the recording. And in the recording itself, there are 1 or 2 errors that I made while making it, and I've corrected it after listening to it. They're really small errors, but I've corrected it, which I'll give to you at the end of the recording. So yeah, enough about that. You can have a pen and piece of paper ready, and to make any notes as you see feel fit. The recording itself is 34 minutes long, following a series of slides, and focusing on the special rules area with in terms of talking about the vertical limits, the lateral limits specific to the sectors of controlled airspace that you need to avoid. And when flying in uncontrolled airspace, what procedures do you need to follow, the type of communication that you need to comply with. In the room today, I've also got Marlene with me. She's managing all the behind the scenes. So I'm going to hand over to her now. We're going across to the recording. Should there be any problems with it as we go along, obviously this is our first time that we're doing this webinar, but and being involved with this, we'll come straight back to me and I'll continue with the talking. So I'll see you on the other side of this video. Hi everybody, welcome to the Talking Radio Airspaces webinar. It's the first one of our kind. We're calling it the Part 1 Johannesburg Special Rules Area, and we've decided to put these webinars together in the interests of aviation safety. We've had a lot of clients asking us as well about airspace and the difference between controlled and uncontrolled. We decided to start with Johannesburg as being the focal point, because it's one of the more complicated areas when we talk about special rules area. So today's discussion is going to be about what is required of you, the pilot, when operating in such an airspace. And remember that this type of webinar is specific or includes pilots flying fixed wing, helicopter, paraglider, drones, gyrocopters, light sports aviation. So it's basically everybody that can fly should be listening to this type of webinar, in the hope that they can learn a little bit more about the difference between controlled and uncontrolled airspace and what is required by them in operating within a special rules area. This is the first webinar of its kind that we're putting together, so I might make a few errors as I'm going along and in my discussion, so please bear with me. And I'm going to be using this PowerPoint presentation. You'll see the slide has just popped up now with the Johannesburg Special Rules area in its entirety. This particular document is available at any flight any pilot shop for free as part of your aviation catalog, which includes the VHF frequencies for various sectors and areas. Anyway, let's get started and let's discuss Johannesburg and their special rules area. So why is it called the special rules area would be your first question. Because there are special rules that have been developed to facilitate aircraft operating within the parameters and boundaries of such an airspace. If you're looking on your chart or webinar in front of you, I'm just going to draw part of it just to illustrate what I'm referring to. It's this line that's going around over here and then meets back obviously back at this point. So everything that's operating within that area is operating in accordance with the Johannesburg special rules. There's defined frequencies which also are noticeable as you go around. I'll circle one of them, for example, Johannesburg Special Rules West 125.8. And these frequencies are associated to procedures that the pilot would need to comply with when operating within that parameter of airspace. So it's really good advice and suggestion for all of you out there to either get hold of one of these catalogs, or even better, to get a one in, let's make it a 1 in 50,000 aeronautical chart, which would give this information in more detail, of course, but this will help you to also define key points that you need to be familiar with. As a visual flight rule VFR pilot, you know that you need to be aware of reference points, so ground navigational aids that are going to help you to facilitate your flight path, your intended flight path, and for planning purposes, what you intend what's your objectives for that flight itself. So this special rules area, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the vertical and the lateral limits of the airspace, and then I'm also just going to highlight some key points for you to take note of with regards to controlled airspace, and then procedures to apply when operating
in special rules, and then we're briefly going to discuss each sector on its own. In other words, the west, the south, and the east sector. And there'll be my contact details will appear on the last slide. So this is a pre-recorded webinar that we've put together. I can't interact with you on this particular one, but as we grow with webinar experience, we'll become more interactive and facilitate questions that you have from the start. So let's kick off with the discussion on the special rules airspace, and that's also important for this webinar, as we're going to focus specifically on special rules, not on definitions and terms with regards to some of the areas I'm going to highlight. Those will come at a later point, in terms of the webinar series, and then of course you are welcome to contact me with any further questions. So when we're discussing the vertical limits of the Joburg Special Rules area, key factor to take note of here is that the Special Rules area vertical limit is 7,500 feet. That means that any aircraft operating in this area of the Special Rules can only fly up to a maximum height of 7,500 feet vertically in order to remain within the limits of the Johannesburg Special Rules area. If you consider that your elevation in this area is approximately 5,500 feet, that means that you are limited to a vertical height of 2,000 feet above ground level within that area. So what we need to look at now, we've discussed the vertical limits. Now let's look at the lateral limits of the Special Rules area. This is quite a complex task in terms of the airspace, as you can see just by looking at the area itself. But once someone has explained it to you and given you an overview, it does become much easier to understand. So I'm going to do that once again just by illustrating with some color on the areas of interest. Let's maybe just use Lanseria here as a kickoff point. You see these dotted lines going around here in a race course pattern. That refers to the Lanseria CTR. And then again, if we just look at Johannesburg or Tambo International, these dotted lines coming along here and then spreading from a dotted going into a solid line. Okay, this is referring again to controlled airspace within the sector. Here is the dotted lines highlighting Rand Airport, for example. This is the area that you would need as the pilot to avoid in total if you're not intending to fly in that airspace. So of course, if you do intend to fly into an airspace like Rand Airport, you would want to identify with the procedures and frequencies and limitations of that airspace or airfield itself. This webinar, however, is focusing on the special rules area. So we need to therefore identify some key elements with regards to this lateral limits. And the first thing to take into account would then be the altitudes that are expected of you when flying within certain parts of the special rules. So that in order to explain that, we need to, ideally you need to just maybe have a pen and paper and take these magnetic headings down. Think about a magnetic compass pointing towards north, and let's split this compass up into two equal parts. We're going to start with the magnetic heading of 090 degrees. So that's over here somewhere. I'm just drawing let's just draw a circle here for you in the corner here, and we're going to split it into two parts. So we're starting here in that area from 090 degrees, go in a clockwise direction towards 269 degrees magnetic. That's, in other words, that's pointing towards south, southwest, southeast, more or less. Then you would fly at a height of 7,000 feet on any one of those particular headings. Whereas if you went from a magnetic heading of 270 degrees in a clockwise direction to 089 degrees magnetic, you would then be flying at a height of be required to fly at a height of 7,500 feet. Now you can see automatically there's a 500-foot separation between traffic routing north and south within the special rules area, but there are certain aircraft that don't intend to fly at those heights or cannot get to those heights. Let's use maybe a powered paraglider as an example in this illustration. So they want to fly at a lower altitude, but they still want to operate within the special rules area. So the third rule within the special rules area is that any aircraft fly at 6,500 feet and or below, in other words, just above 1,000, between ground level and 1,000-foot AGR, then you can fly at 6,500 feet in either direction. That obviously is a little bit of a dangerous situation, as you could imagine, because that means traffic routing in a northerly and a southerly direction can both maintain 6,500 feet. This means that in order for you to operate within the special rules area, you don't need to only just be familiar with the airspace, you also need to be familiar with the frequency, as per here, there's 125.8 again as the example, and then what is required of you as the pilot with regards to that frequency. This is very different to flying in controlled airspace. Again, I'm highlighting Lancero CT over here as a reference, because inside controlled airspace, ATC is going to give you the instructions and tell you what's required. In uncontrolled airspace, especially, for example, here at special rules area, it is up to you to identify with others what you intend to do. And we need to discuss this procedure, which we're going to do a blind broadcast. We will practice that just now when I discuss the areas in detail. So when you're looking at this airspace, you're also going to notice that besides the vertical and lateral limits, there is areas marked. For example, over here you can see this color coding is not 100% correct, as you'd see on the aeronautical chart, but this area refers to a blue route, and we need to be aware of what are the procedures, what's required when operating on that blue route. For those of you that are already flying and wanted to maybe just find out about the special rules area itself, make sure you don't confuse the special rules area with the semicircular rule. So those are two rules that are completely different and should not be associated with each other. They have different rules. This rules that we're talking about now is specific to the Johannesburg special rules area. As we said when we started this webinar, we're going to expand and go further, and next one in the series, which would be part 2, we'll discuss Cape Town. But for now, we're just focusing on the special rules area. Alright, so let's move straight on to the next slide. Sorry, let me just rub this out quickly. And here we go. So now we are defining the special rules area into 3 different elements, and we're starting with special rules west. So here in special rules west, we take in note of firstly the parameters of this airspace. As a VFR, visual flight rule pilot, you need to be familiar with key reference points, so ground aids, reference points that will be known to other people. I've drawn a line around here around Roslyn, the Roslyn power station. So that is a key reference point which would identify the start of the special rules area. And what you need to do when you're looking at special rules is see here. Remember we talked about earlier, we talked about this circle as such going around the airspace to define the special rules. You need to look at areas inside of that, and you need to say, okay, I need to stay outside those areas. For example, if I'm going to operate over here, I need to operate, let me just draw a cross. So if I'm going to operate over there, I need to be within that line over there and away from that line over there in order to maintain my flight in uncontrolled airspace. Okay. We are going to make a blind broadcast now, and we're going to use frequency 125.8 for this purpose. So this idea is to give you, or this illustration is to give you an idea of what would be required from you when making such a broadcast. Right, so the blind broadcast, and remember this is just an example of one, and then we'll discuss it. Oh, sorry, let me just rub this out here. Traffic in the Johannesburg Special Rules area. This is Alpha Bravo Charlie, high wing, operating over at the Hartbeespoort Dam at 6500 feet. We'll be flying straight and level here for the next 10 minutes. Any traffic, please acknowledge. Alpha Bravo Charlie. Now, some of you are saying, oh no, that, especially those of you that have been operating in or been flying for a while, say that's a terrible broadcast. You don't need to say any traffic, please acknowledge. You don't need to say your call sign in the front, call sign at the end. And many people have their own variations on that broadcast. And my answer to that is you all are correct. There is nobody that's incorrect when it comes to a blind broadcast, or correction, a broadcast in uncontrolled airspace. Just to clarify, a broadcast in uncontrolled airspace is if your radio is serviceable, and a blind broadcast is if you suspect that your radio is unserviceable, or if you know that you have a radio failure that's currently in place. All right, so what you need to do when you're going to make this broadcast within a special rules area, and this also goes in for uncontrolled airspace, is ask yourself the following questions. Who are you? What are you? Where are you? What do you intend doing? And if possible, to add to that, how long do you intend operating in that area or conducting that exercise for? ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, does not specify exactly what procedure to follow when making broadcasts in uncontrolled airspace. I have studied this at length to try and find out some guidance, and having been in this field now, giving radio lectures and training for, this is going into my 26th year, I have got some idea as to how this should be done. But as I said in the beginning, you guys are all correct. My procedure is not the actual and only procedure. What's very important is that you are talking and that you're telling everybody what you're doing. You're not assuming, and you're not just letting everybody else talk while you keep quiet and hopefully they don't hear you, and you might feel embarrassed about your broadcast and so on. You need to rather focus on making the broadcast and keeping your skies and yourself safe when in operation. All right, so that was just giving you an overview or kind of a broadcast. Once again, this webinar is not about broadcasts. This is about the Special Rules area. So let's go into the next area of the Special Rules West here, and I'm just going to draw the line here. You can see I'm right over it, in fact. That's called the Kailami VFR Blue Route. You wonder why it's not painted in blue on here, being a VFR Blue Route, but have a look at your aeronautical chart, the one in 50,000, and you'll see a clearer definition than this, which has only been used for illustration purposes. Take note that if you are flying along this blue route, it's taking you clear of two defined controlled airspaces. One is called the Lancero CTR, and one is called the Grand Central ATZ. In this case, there are various classes of airspace, but that's not for this webinar. We just need to be aware that we are operating between two sectors of controlled airspace. In other words, there's an air traffic controller communicating from that control tower, and we are not communicating with them by following this blue route and maintaining those heights, the restrictions that we referred to earlier with regards to the special rules. So if we could just recap, if you're routing in a northerly direction, remember you'd be routing at 7,500 feet. And then, of course, in a southerly direction, you'd be routing at 7,000 feet or 6,500 feet and below in either direction if you're not going to maintain either one of those two altitudes. So this blue route, any blue route that you see in a special rules area, is always going to be designed to take you clear of controlled airspace, which is very important. We referred earlier in this slide to Roslyn over there. So if we come down here towards the south, and I'm not going to be exactly on it here, but it's here somewhere to the south here, you're going to find Gold Reef City. Those are two key reference points to identify with when operating in the Johannesburg Special Rules Area West. Now, just coming back to the broadcast as well, when you're making the broadcast, you might refer back to my broadcast just now. I just said Joburg Special Rules West. So for those of you that want to improve on those broadcasts, remember that if you speak to Johannesburg Special Rules West, as I'm clearly identifying here between Roslyn and Gold Reef City as an illustration, you're speaking to everybody within that sector of the special rules area. So you might want to change your broadcast to say traffic in the Johannesburg special rules west operating in the, or not operating, I know some of the instructors don't like you using the word operating, so we could change it to flying in the Sandton area. So all of a sudden your broadcast highlights just traffic here in this area on the 125.8. Okay, so I'm just giving you some tips again and ideas about how to broadcast, but I get sidetracked with the subject that I enjoy, so let me get back on track here again and talk about special rules area, which is what you need to know and what you've come to find out. Now have a look over here. Sorry, let me just rub everything off here to make it clear for you. Have a look at this section on the airspace here on the Special Rules West. You can see this area that's digging into the Special Rules area itself. It's called the FAD 129. On your chart you won't see the D clearly. This illustrates danger airspace, and if you had to look in the AIP, which stands for Aerodrome or Aeronautical Information Publication, and under ENR, En route navigation regulations number 5.5, so 5.5, you are going to come across an area which is called navigational warnings, and it will tell you that this area is called a GF area, a danger, so FAD, danger area, general flying area. This means that aircraft operating within this sector of airspace will be on a different frequency to the frequency you're on, which is 125.8. So you would need to do some groundwork and planning and prep. So if you decide you're going to fly from Roslyn, for example, and you're flying towards Airspace Dam, and your flight is going to take you anywhere, or any portion of your flight is going to take you through this Grand Central General Flying Area, that you're going to need to change frequency and broadcast to inform traffic on this in the GF of your intentions. So yeah, you can see once again, very important, taking notes of your airspace and the design and what is required of you within that sector of airspace. As another example, I'll show you FAP 64, that's prohibited airspace. This happens to be Pilindaba. If you're not going to be readily affected by Pilindaba in this instance because you are flying in uncontrolled airspace or special rules area, and Pilindaba is falling within the lateral limits of the Lanseria airspace. Okay. However, the lateral airspace over here starts from 6,500 feet to 7,600 feet. Let me just show you that over there. Okay, so that's their TMA. In other words, if you are flying 6,500 feet, between 6,500 and 7,500 feet in this area, just to the north of that, let me just rub this out for you quickly and show you. So if you're operating in this area over here at 6,500 feet to 7,500 feet, you are clear of the airspace, the Lanseria TMA, not a problem. If you're coming into their airspace, then you're going to be affected by that. But the difference between that airspace and what you are doing over here in this uncontrolled sector is here air traffic control is going to manage your flight, okay, between the two sectors of airspace. So in other words, when you're operating in special rules area, you are in control of your flight. You need to make sure you are using the correct frequency to advise traffic of your intentions, and that you are broadcasting regular transmissions. There is no rule as to how often you should broadcast. Is it every 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? There is no rule with regards to that. The idea behind broadcasting on the special rules is to make sure that you're informing traffic of your intentions at all times. And whenever you think that you need to make a broadcast, you go ahead. It just depends, of course, how busy that frequency is at the time. This sector of airspace, Special Rules West, particularly here in the Airspace Dam area, just draw a line over here. In fact, I'll just make a circle over here with a line through it. This sector of airspace is very busy. Over the weekends, you're going to find many different aircraft types flying here, including hot air balloons. And you definitely need to be familiar with airspace and frequency and procedures when operating there. Give each other a chance when you're operating on a frequency to transmit, but at the same time, make sure you go on frequency, say what you need to, and come off frequency as well. Do not use it for a chit-chat, for a social communication. For those of you who are not familiar with it, if you wish to communicate on the social frequency, that frequency is 123.45 megahertz. Okay, so that's just for information. Where you see these solid lines anywhere along here, for example, this is taking you past Swartkorps Air Force Base, and then it's going through towards Wonderboom. So it's clearly defined on this side by all these controlled sectors of airspace over here. But you still need to do your homework and groundwork before flying in there. One last thing about this area as well, you've got a couple of uncontrolled airfields here in the Special Rules West that I have provided radio lectures to in the past couple of years. So I'll just refer to one of them, and that area is called Grasslands. I'm drawing the circle over here now with a line through it. It's more or less over there. That's near the Attridgeville Ridge. And what you need to be aware of as the user is that Grasslands, as an uncontrolled airfield, is not clearly marked on any chart because it's not a registered airfield. That means, as the user of the aeronautical chart or the special rules chart, just take into account that there are unmanned airfields within the special rules area that are also conducting training. They might be conducting training on their own frequency and listening out and broadcasting on the dedicated special rules frequency, but it's up to you to also take note of and be familiar with your surroundings. So ask questions. Do not be afraid to ask air traffic control, ask your flying instructor, ask those that have been flying for quite a while, is there anything that you need to take note of when going on a particular flight? Using the landmarks in this example, there's other things for you to look out for. For example, the Hyundai balloon, which is flying at the Radisson Hotel in Sandton, and maybe there's a little bit further on, you'll see the other balloon, which is flying there at the Monte Casino. Those are good reference points as well in terms of guidelines for your Kalami VFR Special Blue route. Alright, so let me just rub this out. Remember, if you have any questions, please come back to me. I'll give you my details at the end of this presentation. Briefly, we're just going to talk about Joburg Special Rules South. So Special Rules South is always, or people like to remark and say that it reminds them of a slice of cake. You can see the airspace defined over there as such. And within the Special Rules area, you have, once again, danger areas, FAD. Let me just draw a circle around it for you. This airspace you'd need to be, remain clear of. Over here you've got the FAD 183. This is a general flying area, which is marked as such coming around here. And these areas, the general flying areas, have got their own designated frequencies. This airspace over here is quite interesting because this is the Johannesburg general flying area, which I'm drawing in part of it right now. That's the FAD 182. So you've got 1, 2, 3 general flying areas within the Joburg Special Rules South, and then also down here towards the southwest area you've got the prohibited airspace, FAP 67. This is a lot of information that you need to be familiar with if you're planning to operate in the south. So although there's not much controlled airspace down this side, there's many uncontrolled airspaces and procedures that you need to be familiar with. Alright, just to define this a bit more clearly, here's Gold Reef City. I'm drawing the circle around it now, and then following the N12 going in this direction, that is taking you towards Vereniging, and routing, the line is not clearly marked on this chart, but there's a line routing in this direction, and that would take you towards Heidelberg. Procedures are exactly the same here in the Special Rules South area, although you don't have many key points that you can use as a reference. So let's, for example, use Hotel Golf Victor as a reference. The circle is over there. If you were making a broadcast in this area over here, just drawing a cross, you can see there's not much in this area to define the area that you're in. Then you would tell traffic in the Special Rules South area that you are approximately, say, 7 or 8 nautical miles to the north of Heidelberg. So those are, once again, some clues and tips for you to use when making broadcasts in uncontrolled airspace. Right, then our last slide is Special Rules East. And in Special Rules East, what I need to illustrate over here, because there's not much else to tell you with regards to special rules, except of course that the frequency here is 125.4, and that this airspace doesn't go exactly in a perfect circle as the other two airspaces do, that there's a sect here, this buffer that's extending out here and going towards Witbank. There's a circle over there. Which is just an extension of the special rules area itself. And if you're planning to fly in this area where the cross is over there, remember that that's a lot of paradrop activity takes place in that area. So be on the lookout not only for traffic but for paradrop or parachutists, especially on weekends, although they are normally operational throughout the week. What I wanted to make you familiar with here, though, is let me just rub this out, is I wanted to highlight this point here. Sorry, let me rub it out again. I'm still getting used to this working tool. This line's coming down like this and then extending out there, and part of that section over there, and then it's meeting up with the Johannesburg CTR coming back up here. This is called the Johannesburg, this is a buffer zone. So what is important for you to note, that although you're flying in the Johannesburg Special Rules area, this sector of airspace is being manned by Johannesburg ATC, this buffer zone. And when you operate in the buffer zone, you need to speak to Johannesburg information on frequency 119.50 megahertz. That is Joburg information south. So anybody that's operating, for example, in the Petite area, and you wish to get airborne from there and routing say towards Rand Airport, you are climbing straight into the Johannesburg buffer zone area, and it is worth your while communicating directly with Johannesburg information and advising them of your intentions. For aircraft that are equipped with transponder codes, ATC will allocate a transponder code, but remember, if you are not allocated one when operating in the special rules area, you can still, however, select your transponder code. For everybody except helicopters, your transponder code is 2000, and then of course for helicopter traffic, your score code is 2600. And another tip for you, something to think about, is if you're getting airborne, for example, out of the Brakpan area. Let me just show you that quickly. Just take this out here. So if you're getting airborne from the Brakpan area, you're obviously flying straight into Joburg information airspace before you go into the Joburg Special Rules airspace. Then why are you contacting them? So something else for you to think about. When you contact Joburg information, you're advising them of your flight path, especially if you're planning to go outside of the special rules area and say go and fly around the Vaal Dam. ATC will then allocate a specific transponder code to you, advise you if they have any traffic to affect, and tell you to continue on special rules east 125.4 and to contact them again on exiting the Joburg special rules to the south-southeast area on 119.5. So you can see the pre-planning that's going into this. But take note that the buffer zone is a very busy sector, and it means that you might not get hold of air traffic control immediately on first contact. But don't treat that airspace as an area where you should just then keep quiet and assume that you'll be seen. You can't really approach that as to be
Hi, everybody. Apologies for that. As I said in the beginning, this is our first webinar, so we nearly made it to the end of that recording. The last slide was actually just to say thank you for watching attending the webinar in terms of the recording. So this, you should see a slideshow in front of you now with it's a presentation with titled Johannesburg Special Rules Area, and a couple of the errors that I made as we were going on through that recording. The first one was I said a 1 in 50,000 aeronautical chart. That is incorrect. It's a 1 in 500,000 aeronautical chart, so apologies for that. Then in terms of the magnetic headings, I did ask you in the recording to have a pen and paper to write it down, but I've also included it here for you. So if you want to make a note of that while the slide is on, the magnetic headings are written there, 090 to 269 in the southerly direction and 270 to 089 degrees in the northerly direction. Then remember that your heights when flying in the special rules area are all based on the QNH settings. And, if you want to find out more about QNH, obviously you can email me and I can assist you with that. That would also be on your course for those that are going to still do their radio license. Then the lateral limits, which I do talk about as well in this webinar, specific for Johannesburg. Now you'll notice I've written FAOR. So for those of you not familiar with it, that's an ICAO designator for Johannesburg, OR Tambo International, and it's listed as FAOR, FA representing the first two letters for South African airspace. The special rules area, that would be found in your aeronautical information publication. Under ENR 2.2 section 4, it's quite complicated in essence because it tells you the latitude and longitude for various points on that special rules area. So ultimately, it's better to get to know the area from a visual reference to identify the extent of the rule itself, from center fix as such, which is the Johannesburg center point. Remember, very important, the lower limit of the FAR, the Johannesburg TMA, is 7,600 feet, and you guys heard in that recording as well with the special rules, and those that know the area, you'll know that your upper limit of the special rules here is 7,500 feet. So there's a 100-foot buffer area between yourself at highest point on the special rules area and the start of controlled airspace. So it's very important that you make sure that you are broadcasting your intentions accurately, that you're flying on a pressure setting on a QNH is going to make sure that you're not going to encroach, or what we prefer to use the term busting controlled airspace. You don't want to enter the Johannesburg TMA, that special rules area. The last thing I mentioned there was broadcast again and versus blind broadcast. So just remember that when you do blind broadcast, specific to uncontrolled it's specific to a transmission when you have a potential radio failure. While broadcast refers to making a broadcast in controlled or uncontrolled airspace. In this case, it's the Johannesburg Special Rules area, and advising all traffic of your intentions. Now, for today's webinar, we also, obviously, we're focusing on communications. So as Talking Radio, we have quite a few products that are available for those people that want to, familiarize themselves with radio and communications. We have the RT fixed wing and helicopter, which is normally sold at 219 Rand and 45, including VAT, as you'll see on your screen. And for those of you that are drone pilots, for example, you could benefit from either one of these recordings to ensure you, is one of the recordings that we have, and it's simulated between pilot and ATC, is how to communicate with someone else on frequency. And then there's also those sections which help you to make what we termed just now the broadcast or the blind broadcast. We're offering a special with this webinar, 40% discount and the price there listed at 131.67, including VAT. While I'm talking, we've sold a few already, so there's 3 units available. We're just keeping the special just for this webinar, and we'll keep it open for approximately 5 minutes after the webinar is gone. You'll see on your right-hand side of the screen, you can click on the link there if you're interested in the product and follow the prompts. Or you can also obviously email Marlene, and that slide's appearing now. Just email her with RTFixed or RTHeli to marlene@talkingradio.co.za, and she will get back to you with the relevant details. Hundreds of our listeners are interested in the special rules area for Cape Town. So thank you very much for your feedback. We'll definitely be putting that together, and we will inform all of you on the time and place for the next webinar. And really thank you for your time. Please, if you have any questions, this is a lot of information to take in in such a short space of time on the Johannesburg special rules area. Any things that you're unsure about, please come back to me by email. It's fine if you email Marlene at or myself, Dylan at talkingradio.co.za, and I'll be glad to assist you. And if there's any other comments that you want to make in the chat box when I shut off now, please, you're welcome to, and I'll reply to you. I'll leave the line open for about another 5 more minutes. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll see you on the next Special Rules Airspace webinar. Bye-bye.